Welcome to the Cambridge Residents Alliance Winter Forum. Will you be forced out of Cambridge? Who decides? A forum on keeping Cambridge affordable. Today's turnout shows the deep hunger Cambridge residents have to influence our future, to participate in a healthy, inclusive, democratic process. This is our fourth public forum with a focus on quality of life and livability in Cambridge. We sponsored a very successful citywide neighborhood summit last June and are planning a second one this coming May. You have packets which include today's program and other relevant information. There are also handouts from some of today's presenters that didn't make it into the packets. They're on that back rectangular table by the windows. And I think Lee is going to pass out her talk. Let's see. Please use the index cards on your table for questions or comments that there may not be time to address when we have Q&A discussions, because we'll get back to people on any questions we didn't get to discuss now. Now, it's my honor to introduce Renee Gray, who I'm sure many of you know. Renee is a longtime political activist. She's on the leadership team for the Area 4 Neighborhood Coalition. She's a very respected Cambridge woman resident. Thank you.
Hello, how are you? I really appreciate you all coming out on this day and this weather, because if I wasn't doing this, I'd be home. So you are brave people wanting to make a difference, wanting to make a change in Cambridge. And I'm just going to give an overview. I'm not representing the views of Area 4 Coalition or the Cambridge Residents Alliance. It was an interesting title. Will you be forced out of Cambridge? Who decides? And there was a point, oh I know. Sustain a livable and diverse Cambridge for its residents. If you don't know it, it works for a lot of people, y'all. This is already true for a lot of people. It works for them, which makes your job twice as hard. Because for them it's diverse and everything they need or want is here. So I don't know why you all are trying to change things up and make life complicated for the rest of us, because we live in a sustainable city, a diverse city, and we're residents. So just a point of reference. So your work is that much harder because there are some people where this city works for them. I can't speak for those people that the city does not work for, that their diversity and their sustainability at best is compromised and being compromised every day. So the question for me then becomes, will you be forced out of Cambridge? Who decides? And as I was waiting to come in, someone said, oh, where's the housing forum? And it made me rethink the title some more. Is it a housing forum that we're here to talk about today? Or is it a development issue or development issues that we're here to talk about today? And basically the fundamental question is, who's driving the train? It's irrelevant whether it's housing or development. Who's driving the train? And what we know is not only are we not driving it, we're barely on it. Yeah. Okay? So if we want to keep that image in mind today as we do the work that we've come out to do. I feel this is hard. I feel very privileged to be here today as a owner of a condominium in Area 4. Now me and the bank own it, but this question for me can be decided by me. And most of you in this room can answer this question for yourself. this question as posed to people who don't have, they don't own, is a different kind of question, and we need a different kind of lens and driver to begin thinking about that. So what I'm talking about is being an African American woman on a fixed income, still being able to live in Cambridge. So I feel very privileged. Also able to be somewhat, most of the time, able-bodied. So attend meetings, to participate in ways that, I can when I can. But it saddens me to stand before you, being that representative, when I have neighbors and friends who are in my place, or the decision for them to stay has been taken away from them. So I often try to talk about those folks who the decision has already been taken away. They don't live here anymore. And they're not coming home again. And it really ages me when I start thinking, I get to be this old lady that, oh, what about Central Square? And Purely Supreme, and a local grocery store. And I sound crazy even to myself. So, but to, again, not to have really a neighborhood grocery store. We have CVS as a chain for the whole city. So, but I remember the Hunt's Pharmacy. And they would make you up concoctions, like in the old days. You come in and say, well, my grandmother used to put together, and they could do it, compounds, they could do it. Old school, never gonna happen again. So again, these things that I'm reminiscing are this. Renee, they're just not coming back. Give it up. But we can still fight for and be a voice for those who are continuing to be forced out, and I would just say, as a closing point, the discussion today, if you can use this lens, will class, race, or economics, how do they interplay with this question of who will be forced out? You can't have the conversation in isolation. Those things also dictate what is going to happen and how it's going to happen. And so as we look across the cities and we look at where people are able to resist or they're able to fight back, let's look at the composition of those groups or those neighborhoods, of those communities, and realize that there are disparities in Cambridge. I'm sorry, but it's true. We're looking at poverty in Cambridge. It's true. We're looking at sending kids home with backpacks with food for the weekend. It's true. So we have all of the contradictions, and we also have the will and commitment of so many good people that it's only here that we could ask this question and come up with a different answer. So good luck and thanks.
And I want to talk a little bit about displacement. But first I have to say, I've been here since 1977. I lived in Magazine Street when I first got here. I moved here because of its diversity. And in fact, my landlord and landlady were a mixed race couple. And I came from Brighton, and there was, let's say it wasn't a hotbed of diversity over there at that time. And I came here because it was very innovative. There was all kinds of things going on. There was the Great Eastern Trading Company. There was food co-ops. There was free boxes. There was, like Renee, I'm looking back to what we had then, and we had it all. We were very happy to be here, and the rents were reasonable thanks to the rent control. And I moved into a rent control apartment, and I was young at the time, and in 1978 decided to have a child. Then my husband was diagnosed with terminal cancer in 1980, and I realized the precariousness of my situation. I was living at something very below market rate, whatever that was, And if I had to leave, it would have been pretty tough. But thanks to my friends, my neighbors, the people of Simplex Steering Committee who passed a hat, and that money went toward my son going to college, incidentally. I have to thank the members of the Simplex group for that. I was able to find a house that had been boarded up and was abandoned and was about to be auctioned off. So I was very, very lucky. But at the time I realized how precarious my situation was. And I watched my neighbors leave. I lived on Magazine Street at 63. My neighbors on the right-hand side, they had to leave. Their art in court got sold and the prices went up. And one of my neighbors was going to come and she couldn't get out. She's up in Malden. So I'm going to represent the people who couldn't come because they're very far away. I started a business in Cambridge. I'm a plumber. And my clientele were people that were all walks of life. They weren't looking for a $5,000 faucet. They just wanted the things fixed. And that's changed. But also my clientele disappeared. I lost, let's say, about a quarter of my clientele. And the first one, I remember distinctly, it was a woman that lived on Norfolk Terrace or place, I can't remember which. And she had a very small condo and decided they were going to have children, and she couldn't trade up in Cambridge. She couldn't get a larger place, so she went to Natick and she told me how she got this larger place, a yard, everything out there in Natick. But over the years, it's like one after another, I watched people go. Sometimes pretty far displaced, sometimes, get my card here. Okay, but well, I get it better, huh?
Breaking the connection.
Oh, okay. And I've invited here some people. As a plumber, I have a bold voice. Okay. So I've invited a few people here. I haven't seen if everybody has come, but I wanted to give some idea about the history. The eviction-free zone formed before the end of rent control, and we have one of the founders here. Over there. Barbara. Okay, thank you. And just push the button down.
No, keep trying.
Okay. Barbara, 1 minute. All right. Okay, so I've invited some people here from in different categories. People who were evicted either before the end of rent control because the building got sold and then they couldn't find other rent control apartments to go to, or after rent control ended, and people who also were taking care of elderly people in their building. I have several friends in that category were taking care of elderly people, and then suddenly when they died, they were forced out. And I know a very close friend, an artist in this community, that just happened to him recently. A person in a plumbing supply house that I deal with, she was in exactly the same situation in Glenwood Street. And then suddenly she had to get out, and it's very, very hard, obviously, to find an apartment in Cambridge. So if anybody would like to come speak, I have first Mary Lino from 55 Magazine Street. And if you would stand up and just tell us about, 55 Magazine Street, what happened to that building?
I moved to Cambridge in the early 70s because of rent control. And also it was the gay capital of the world at that time. So I was very happy to get into a rent control building on Magazine Street at 55 Magazine Street. And I lived there for 40 years. And I must say, it was a very stable building. We were a small community, and we did, in many ways, take care of each other. And we were a diverse community, too, age-wise, class-wise, and culture-wise. So once rent control sadly went out, we got a letter, each of us, from our current landlord, who said that he had done well under rent control and he intended to keep the rents reasonable. And that, in fact, was true for a number of years. However, it came at some cost to us. I lived on the top floor, and I had leaks for 12 years. The landlord would have somebody come in and patch it, and then it was just a matter of a few rainstorms before it found another path. And that was true of all of us on the 6th floor. The building had 53 units, and it was sold. The landlord got into some legal financial problems, so he sold the building in 2007 to an LLC group. And they were written up in what was called The Bridge, kind of a radical newspaper that didn't last long, but it had an expose on who bought the building. Anyway, we were there for a year and a half with, they jotted up the rents quickly as soon as they bought it. And it was a year and a half before anybody was notified officially that it was going to become a condo building. Once it became a condo building, they were doing, the LLC were doing several buyouts from different tenants. So we sort of straggled out of there. But I continued to stay, and I was, as soon as you could have a year of protection or a year and a half, or 2 years, depending on your age or disability or income. As soon as the 2 years were up for me, my landlady, who was a former owner, raised my rent over $500. And I said, no thank you. But I was fortunate to live in the neighborhood and in fact buy a condominium which was less than the rent that she was going to charge me. Well, wait a minute. I want to. Can I just finish 1 second? So as soon as it became condo, we went to the city and asked for their help. And I must say that the Housing Authority helped a great deal, community development helped a great deal, trying to find housing for those who were eligible. But I found inspectional services to be totally blank on any kind of help or request that we made. The owners pulled building permits, but they lied about what they were doing in the building. If they had reached a certain amount of repairs, then it had to include sprinklers.
Sorry. If every speaker to 5 minutes. Sorry, I could be the bad today.
I just want to say, the eviction-free zone, I regret that it's not still here. That's what we really could use, some radical help. We went to the city council, and believe me, they were of no help at all. 3 of them have left the council, thankfully.
Anne Reeves and Marjorie Shepherd were the buyers of 55 magazine.
Hi, I just said I would speak for my kids because they're not here anymore. 1973, I was kicked out of my old apartment and was looking around desperately for a place to live, and some friends of mine were buying a triple-decker, $50,000 for the entire triple-decker in Cambridge. So I had not even thought about buying, but $3,000 down, I borrowed it from my parents, and my rent was, my monthly fee was the same as I was paying rent. Now I couldn't afford to even rent that, what I have. But when my kids put them through, they went through the whole Cambridge system, elementary school, high school, went off to college, came back, they couldn't afford to live here. So, and they would have liked to have been here. So we've lost some good people to Somerville and Framingham. And frankly, the people who are living in my building, nice as they are, they're very wealthy. And I feel like not just are my kids not near me as I would love to have them and my grandkids, but the people who are here are not as diverse, and it's not as interesting a community as it could be. So just another one of the examples of what you all know is going on.
Okay.
Is everyone doing? My name is Roberto Armand.
I'm Stephanie Grant.
All right, so basically a couple weeks ago we had a little rally, protest, Black Lives Matter protest in Cambridge. It was organized primarily by Stephanie, Tony B, and a few other people. Yeah, it was primarily organized by Stephanie, Tony B, and a few other known people and activists around Cambridge, and a few of the new guard that's coming up. During the protest, I said a few words concerning some of the situations that's going on regarding our community in Area 4 in particular. And so I'm just going to restate that real quick. Bear with me. Okay. We're here because we want to bring light to the issues surrounding the experience of the Black community in Cambridge. Despite the progressive nature of the city, the same struggles seem to beguile us. Issues regarding the educational achievement gap of our children, the criminalization of Black identity that results in police brutality, and the school-to-prison pipeline that renders our young men economically disenfranchised. The ongoing changes in this neighborhood that seem to echo the gentrification already underway in places like Brooklyn, New York, and historically Black urban areas nationwide. For this purpose, we have come together to proclaim that even here in Cambridge, Massachusetts, we must assert that Black Lives Matter. More than that, Black livelihood matters. Here in this city are some of the greatest concentrations of economic and intellectual capital on earth. Leaders of the planet come to this city on their path to power, including our current president. With that in mind, we insist that the residents of the city in the most disadvantaged areas, including most dramatically the poor, have an equal access to these world-class resources, so we can be clear that all of us, regardless of background, have a real chance to stay in the neighborhoods that we grew up in, so that we can raise our children in homes within our neighborhood, send them to our schools without fear of alienation and neglect, and partake of the opportunities granted by expansion of business and real estate development in a way that actually benefits the community that is already here, and help all of us to realize our true potential as residents, citizens of Cambridge, and as human beings. Black Lives Matters, yes. Black livelihood matters.
I should have gone first. So I'll just say that I am a longtime Cambridge resident. I've lived here over 20 years, which, if you can tell, is a great portion of my life. Graduated from Cambridge Public Schools, went to college, and now I have a decent job. I work in African Studies at BU. I have a ton of student loans because my parents are really, really poor. And everybody else that I grew up with, especially the people of color who grew up in Cambridge with me, have since moved out. Their parents have moved out. My mother made the decision to stay in Cambridge because she liked it here, but mostly because the education system here is so much better than the other places that were affordable. Lynn, Chelsea, Everett, those places, she could see that there was a huge difference between the education systems in those places and here in Cambridge. So she made the decision to live in Newtown Court, and her friends were buying houses in Everett and Malden and Lynn and those places, and she now owns nothing, but her kids have gotten to go to college. Mm-hmm. But now, even with a college education, I still can't afford to live in Cambridge. And in order for me to be able to consider living in Cambridge, I have to think about having children. And that's before I'm ready, and that's before my wallet is ready. And so we really need to have a serious conversation about naming the problem. And Cambridge likes to pretend that it's colorblind. Like, we can look around this room. There are very few people of color in this room, and these are people who care. So imagine what the spaces of people who don't care look like. And they're the ones making the decision. They are not concerned about my well-being. They're not concerned about Black livelihoods. They're not concerned about how articulate Roberta seems to be. They're not at all concerned with these problems. And we're the ones here having this conversation. We really need to name the problem. We need to say that if we really want Cambridge to be as diverse as the people who came up here before me said that they came to Cambridge because it was this diverse metropolis. And now what is it? It's white, it's wealthy. Thank you. We need to name the problem. We need to say that Black Lives Matter. We need to say that all people matter. And if we want Cambridge to be the diverse place that it has been in the past, name the problem and make some concrete decisions about keeping us here. I want to live in Cambridge.
Okay, well, thank you so much. I'm Kathy Watkins. I'm on the Cambridge Residents Alliance Executive Committee, and I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Richard Kreshnick. He's a community development professional. Most recently, he works for the City of Boston Neighborhood Development Department for the last 27 years. It's equivalent to our CDD. And he also does some community development work in Latin America. And among Cambridge Residents Alliance people, and maybe others, he's widely known for his rendition of the 12 Days of Christmas with hand and body motions.
Psychologically, you have to make a little adjustment here. We're going from sort of the clear and deep and emotional to the dry and abstract and technical at this moment, because I've been asked to talk about big influential developers in Cambridge. So anyway, the title said something about how these big developers are driving the overdevelopment of Cambridge. So to start off with, I'd like to take issue with my colleagues, because that's not what's driving overdevelopment in Cambridge. It's not the developers, it's the whole system, it's the market in the greater area, it's what's going on in contemporary capitalism, it's what makes this place so attractive for big pharma and life sciences and software companies. The developers are doing everything they can to take advantage of it and to build as big and high and dense and luxury as they possibly can. Yes, so they are obviously part of what's driving overdevelopment in Cambridge. But in our system, they're merely taking advantage of the the economic climate, the context in the area. And that's really the problem. And that's unfortunately a very difficult problem to address. But nonetheless, there's a lot of interest in who are these big developers, how do they operate, what are they like. So I'm just trying to provide a little bit of information about that. Excuse me. To start off with, the four largest developers in the city: Boston Properties, Forest City, Alexandria, and Biomed Realty. Now these four own and operate 1/4 of the total commercial space in the city. That includes every mom and pop store, every auto repair shop, every lab, every office building, every 7-Eleven, anything that's a commercial property. These four developers own and operate 1/4 of the total commercial square footage in the city. About 9 million square feet of commercial and 1 million square feet of residential, these four developers. 3 of them are REITs, real estate investment trusts. It's kind of like a mutual fund for real estate properties. And so they're the people who formed them still control them in all 4 cases. But investors, technically speaking, so to speak, own them, not the people who formed them. And the people who formed them, they have a piece of the equity investment, they have a piece of the action, and they run the show, so they make all the money, the administrative fees, and so on and so forth. But almost all the profits of these REITs are distributed to the investors, which includes the people who formed them. But the 80-90% of the money comes from other people from all over the country, and in some places from all over the world. Forest City who you know did the University Park over here on the MIT land in Cambridgeport. They're not a REIT, and they're somewhat closely, they have investors, but they're somewhat closely held by the Ratner family, the Cleveland Ratner family. But they also now have moved in the direct, I have 1 minute left? My God, okay. Wow. HYM and Twining, they are doing the North Point development, and Twining has 2 residential properties in Kendall Square, luxury apartment buildings, and now he's proposing the new one over here. Twining is interesting because it's not, we always think of Twining, but it's really Normandy or Capital Partners that provide the money and run the show. Wait, I have 30 seconds here and 1 minute here. I'm going to go with 1 minute over there. And the same thing with McKinnon out in West Cambridge. You know, we see the face of McKinnon, but it's not really McKinnon. It's Blackstone, one of the biggest investment companies in the world that runs the entire planet, not just the city of Cambridge. But some of these places, what I'm sorry I'm not having time to talk about, what I wanted to get into was that, you know, some of these places, like Forest City, could care less about what we do. They are so big, even though this is a lot of development, it's nothing compared to their, you know, investments in other parts of the country. You know, putting pressure on Forest City is virtually impossible. But there's other ones that are regionally based, like Boston Properties. It's very big, but it's based in Boston, and it's easier to pressure them.
Okay, Richard's longer presentation will be on the Cambridge Residents Alliance website. And as he said, there are also a limited number of copies in the back. Our next speaker is John Ratliff. John is a retired labor staff, SEIU Local 199. I believe he was the political director. He's also the Economic Justice Coordinator for Mass Peace Action and the Membership Coordinator for the Cambridge chapter of Mass Senior Action.
Thanks, everybody. It is a real challenge to try to talk about anything in depth in 5 minutes. And my assignment was simply to talk about the federal budget, the state budget, and the city of Cambridge budget. So you can imagine the depth I'm going to go into in this discussion. I figured that I didn't want to make too much of the challenge, though, because I saw that Richard was talking before me, and I had the pleasure of reading his 19-page paper, which I would highly recommend. I said, well, if he can do it, I can do it too. And now I see that I might be on weak ground. But I think I'm talking to a knowledgeable audience that is well aware of a lot of what I'm saying anyway. But I wanted us not to forget that we have more to work on than just what's happening here in our city in order to really affect life in our city. And this slide up here represents the federal budget. Let me just talk a little bit about our relationship to the federal budget. Massachusetts sent $85.3 billion to Washington as our contribution to the federal budget. 90% of it or more was from our pockets, individual wage earners, through our payroll taxes, our salaries, our incomes. We received back, spent in the state of Massachusetts by the federal government, $75.9 billion. So we're a major contributor state to the well-being of our country, and of course, that money is spent in many different places to make it so. But that $75.9 billion compares to what our total state government budget is, 46.9 billion. And we should remember that that's not even entirely true, because of that 46.9 billion, a substantial part comes from the federal governments in federal grants for housing, transportation, on and on. 28, close to 30% of the state budget comes from the feds. And then you can see also that's part of the 70-some billion that the feds spend here. This picture is a picture of the overall budget. I don't know how well people can see it through the whole room, but you'll see, and this is what frequently people will say when they're discounting how much money is being spent on defense, that the military represents what it says here, 16.3% of the budget. Medicare, Social Security are substantially larger if you combine the two, and then all the other little breakdowns. But there's a lot of things that are a little misleading about this slide, and if we could go to the next one, it will illustrate it more. And I hope everyone has something in your packet or at the table that spells it out. You know, Social Security and Medicare were the huge pies that were in addition to military on the other one. But that's not something Congress votes on and decides how to spend. That's something that is not discretionary. It's something that Medicare spends as people who are entitled to it get sick, or as people qualify for Social Security and its various aspects, it's paid for. But both of those are paid out of the payroll tax, so they're paid out of special funds funded separately from the income tax and the other forms of federal taxation. What Congress debates and discusses is called the discretionary aspect of the budget, and this is its picture. And you can see from it right there, just from the graphic, what a huge portion of it is on military spending. And now I have 1 minute in both parts of the room, so I'll try to honor that. The thing about that to know is that the military budget is not only what goes to the Department of Defense. There's also all of our nuclear weaponry is primarily covered in the Department of Energy. So, and there are other things. We learned after Ferguson that the Justice Department was also handing out some money to defense contractors for local police to buy from them. But anyway, this is where the huge amount of resources are that we could use to try to address our housing, our flooding problems, a lot of other things we talk about in transportation. But we have to organize to do it. It's an ongoing movement. Right here in Massachusetts, we have people that are doing that. And I'm going to try to wrap it up real fast. Budget for All is the coalition that works on that on a regular basis. There are activities coming up in February 22nd on a Sunday over at E5 in downtown Boston. There's going to be a much more detailed and that will do justice to the budget. And then on April 12th, there's going to be a major public event. But the most important thing this year might be that gathering in New York in April, the April 25th weekend in New York. It's called the Peace and Planet Gathering, and people at Mass Peace Action are helping to organize it. There's materials in your brochure with a picture of Dr. King on it, and I hope you can get in touch, come to those first meetings, become part of the organizing effort to try to shift this a bit so that we have more being spent on what people need. Thank you very much.
Beating the clock. My name's Jan Devereaux. I'm from West Cambridge, and I think I'm going to be joined by Peggy, who's gathering her materials back there. And the second panel is about how the city government's role in responding to the needs that we have just heard about. Housing and equity and all of these things. Who is making the decision? We're electing some of them are appointed. I think our first speaker is here, ready to speak, and it's Gary Dimtrick from North Cambridge. He runs the Association of Cambridge Neighborhoods, ACN, and I'll give him the mic.
Hello. Thank you everybody for coming out on such a frigid day. I really was not expecting this kind of a turnout. I'm filling in for Pebble Gifford, and I had planned to give a narrative to tell the story of what happened when the city announced that it was going to go through a search process for a new city manager, and after dithering and arguing and procrastinating for a couple of years just sort of said, nah, we're not going to do that. We're just hiring the next guy in line. But I'm afraid that that might be too much inside baseball for people. I'm not sure that everybody is familiar with our city form of government, so I'll just briefly talk about that. Every 2 years, you all elect the city council. The city council has a few main responsibilities. They enact legislation, they approve the budgets, the city budget and the school budget, and they hire a few key positions. They are responsible for hiring the city manager. And what does the city manager do? Basically, he's responsible for everything else. The city manager runs the whole city. All the department heads report directly to the city manager. He's in charge of everything they do and making sure that also that all boards and commissions are filled and that sort of stuff. It is actually not legal for members of the city council to interfere in the hiring or firing process in the rest of the city that's controlled by the city manager. Also, the city council can't issue any orders to city employees, the people who work for the city manager. They can issue orders, policy orders to the city manager, and he much of the time follows through. Not always. But there's a big gulf between the people that we elect and the people who actually run the city. I'm not saying this as a criticism of how the city is run, by the way, but just kind of to draw a picture of the distance between the part of the city that you elect and the part of the city that actually does the work of running the city. You know, we had the same city manager, Robert Healy, for more than 30 years. When he was first appointed in 1981, Cambridge was losing its economic base, or had lost its economic base. We had the universities, we had a few corporations. The city was in the red. Since then, we've had all this economic development. The city has a very healthy AAA bond rating. We have all this cash on the side. And many people, probably not everyone in this room, but many people will look at that as the signature achievement of the Healy era, to put Cambridge back on a solid financial footing. Now, a while back, a few years ago, it appeared that, that perhaps Mr. Healy would step aside. And the city council had a very difficult time managing that. One of the councilors, Craig Kelly, first raised this succession issue with a policy order that contained the unfortunate words that certain senior staff are approaching an age where retirement might be an attractive option, which created a very fat and juicy target for the other councilors who couldn't let this opportunity for political grandstanding pass them by. And they just slammed Kelly without really appreciating his major point that you really need to start thinking about what we're going to do. And anyway, they just were pretty hapless. They had never really, none of them had ever participated in a process of hiring a new city manager before, and they just didn't know how to do it. And that's the main point that I wanted to make. And they had promised this national search. I mean, we're a major city. We're very, I think, attractive place for a city manager type of guy to work. I'm sure that we could get a lot of candidates. Yeah, absolutely. Making this up as I go along here. Sorry about that one. And so I think it's very important that, you know, we're going to be facing the succession issue. The city council was unable to deal with it. that we start to push them to think about how are you going to do that. Mr. Rossi's contract is up in a year and a half, and we, the citizens, need to begin to push our councilors to figure out what they're going to do when that time comes, before it comes. Thank you.
Hi, the next person who will be speaking is Heather Hoffman. And Heather lives in East Cambridge. She's been very active, and I'm very grateful to her for her good eye on things. She did graduate, get a law degree from one of our major universities in Cambridge. And lastly, Heather said what was most important for me to say, I think I'd forgotten, it's about you having 2 decades of being...
I'm in my 2nd decade of being a pain in the neck. And I really hope that everybody in this room will join me in being a pain in the neck and will recruit friends. Because complacency will kill this place. Now, if you're looking at your program, you'll notice I am not Doug Brown. And he had, what Doug did, and I hope that you have access to this, there are 2 sheets, double-sided sheets that have information. If they aren't on your table, then I assume they're on this back table. But they're about the money raised by city council candidates in the last 15 years. Now, it's not completely, as I have looked at it, it's not completely city council campaigns. I see the number 2 fundraiser in the back of the room, and he also ran for and served as a state rep and as a state senator, and that money is, I think, mixed into this. So it's still useful to see how much money is going through the political hands of people running our city. Now, what I was going to talk about, and I think Gary talked about a lot of it, is the city charter. In Massachusetts, unlike where I grew up in an unincorporated part of Hillsborough County, Florida, which is where Tampa is. But in Massachusetts, everything is incorporated, and every city or town has a charter, and the various types of charters you can have are set out under state law. So Cambridge is Plan E, and we're very unusual in that. I believe that you aren't even allowed to do some of this stuff anymore, but we did it while it was still legal. And I know that somewhere there are copies of Plan E printed out on the back table there, and I hope that you'll get a chance to take a look at it, because there, as Gary said, the city manager runs this show. So what power does the city council have? They have the power to hire and fire the city manager. That can be really powerful if they use that power to make the city manager think that it's really important to do what they want. In the time that I've been watching, the city council has not chosen to behave that way, at least not publicly. So the city manager pays as much attention to what the city council wants as the city manager feels like. The other thing that the city council, another thing that the city council does is hire the city clerk and the city auditor. And we just recently got a new city clerk who was the former deputy city clerk, and lot like what happened with the city manager. The city clerk keeps the records, and also is kind of the parliamentarian at city council meetings, which can have an effect on what can happen there. The city council has jurisdiction over all city property. That means all of the public ways, that's most of the streets, the sidewalks, and the thing that is most visible about those is curb cuts, because curb cuts are are actual, construction on city property. And those are used often to affect development. If residents can't fight anything, they can sure fight the curb cut. And if developers can't get in and out, can't get cars in and out, that really has an effect on what they can build. So what I want all of you to do is be a pain in the neck. Get out, get involved, pay attention. You might or might not be amazed at how little most of the people in this city know about what their city government does, what the city councilors that they adore actually do when they vote. So pay attention. Do you know that it only takes about 1,600 people to elect a city councilor? That's kind of amazing. So find 1,600 people, or find half of them. Join together. Form slates. There are ways to make this this government more responsive to us, and indirectly have the actual gears of city government be more responsible. Thanks.
And next up, thank you, Heather, that was really good. Next up we have Nancy Ryan, who's going to speak to us about the planning board.
So she's going to be focusing on lessons learned. Learned. Taking on the planning board, what it means for Cambridge's future. She's lived in Area 4 and the Port for 34 years, was founder of the Area 4 Neighborhood Coalition, and she was the executive director of the city's Women's Commission for 25 years. Thanks, Nancy.
Which meant that I worked directly for Bob Healy. I'm going to just say a few things about our experience over the last 9 months, trying to influence the board that has an enormous amount of power over what development gets approved and doesn't get approved. And I think it's fair to say, from what people have been saying about the role of the city manager, the development juggernaut that we are on in this city has been the former and is the current city manager's agenda. So we have a lot in terms of who gets to stay and who doesn't get to stay and what gets built and what doesn't. The city manager is the target. So what have we learned from our critique of the planning board, and what should we do with these lessons? The short answer is that only our activism would have created even the minimal improvements that we've seen. The planning board itself is a problem, but it's also a symptom of a larger concern about city governance. The planning board is appointed by the city manager and has the power to grant special permits for large projects. The former manager Healy and present manager Rossi allowed 5 terms to expire on that board. Their community development department seemed to be giving minimal professional advice to the planning board members about existing neighborhood studies or anything resembling citywide planning as they evaluated each project as a standalone. Resident groups like the Fresh Pond Residents Alliance and the Neighborhood Association of East Cambridge formed in response to ongoing or plans for massive new developments in their neighborhoods, projects that have changed or could change the landscape and character of whole areas and the entire city. We're no longer dealing with large local or even regional property owners, and I think Richard pretty much spoke to that. We're up against these multinational real estate investment trusts accountable to their investors. At the planning board meetings, we residents who watch them encounter teams of fancy business suits and dazzling PowerPoints with photoshopped images of what they want our neighborhoods to look like based on their profit margin. Where are the equally strong voices for the kind of planning that is holistic, environmentally conscious, protective of traditionally affordable housing, and insisting on much more of it? Pretty much, we are those voices, and we need more and more of us to be out there. Our initial intervention took the form of doing some research and included everything from revealing the disastrous conditions of the roadway and the toxicity under New Street to inadequate traffic and parking studies in the Alewife area and in Central Square, to the courthouse with its corrupt history and questionable legality. In May, we submitted a 30-point list of complaints, concerns, and suggestions to the manager. This stimulated the publication of CDD memos on projects, which was great. We actually got to see what CDD thought about projects. 3 new appointments to the planning board that started on December 1st. A new chair, which was really important. The chair had been in place for 24 years. And a slight rule change in January requiring, quote, community engagement, however vague that is. The old rule said that strongly encourages meeting with the abutters, neighbors, and neighborhood groups. Remains in the planning board's rules on the website, so we don't know really if they've actually changed their own rules. But the point is, there had been no formal role for neighborhoods to play when a development was proposed for that neighborhood, and that's something we focused on enormously. We did request that at least one of the new members of the planning board be a, quote, ordinary resident, and don't take this personally for any of you who fit the category, but not a development or a legal professional, but we were rebuffed. We proposed creation of an ombudsman position in community development to provide residents and neighborhoods with more information that we don't have to dig up ourselves. Back in May. That is now being debated, so things move slowly. In the fall, we supported the Carlone petition to give the City Council final approval of large project special permits. It failed. Council members would have had to go on the record on these very projects, so they refused to accept that responsibility. Thank you, Carolyn. I might run over a teeny bit, but not too much. And that was a huge disappointment because you see, if you look at the amount of money flowing into City Council members' campaigns from development related groups, then you see there may be a connection here. A series of City Council-ordered CDD coordinated focus groups in December simply restated many of our original suggestions and identified some positive procedural changes, but were yet another huge time suck for those of us who have been trying to make these things change. In November, we presented a zoning change proposal detailing what early neighborhood review would look like to the manager and his community development leadership. We received no formal response. One outcome of the focus groups, quote, explore options for early engagement on zoning petitions. That was put on the short to long term agenda, 0 to 6 months. We're now 2 months and counting, so don't hold your breath. We would instead be in full master planning mode with a focus on major areas being affected, and we'd be rewriting our zoning ordinance, which has to happen in order for any of this overdevelopment to be controlled by a real master plan. The next 2 big things to come before the planning board, the Normandy Twining proposal for the 200-foot tower at Jill Roan Park in Central Square with 40 affordable units, would set a precedent for the transformation of the square and increase the gentrification of its abutting neighborhoods, including the port. It would have come before the planning board actually during last Tuesday. I got one more paragraph. Can I do that? It would have come before the planning board during last Tuesday's storm, so now it's scheduled for the 27th. And then the Volpe transportation site, in which CDD is proposing far less open space than promised, as Kendall Square has been built out and more market rate housing. A planning board member stated during an initial review of the plan that this is a chance to create far more affordable housing than proposed. CDD seems, however, again, hell-bent on more high and dense market rate housing and maximum build-out, because that's been the city manager's direction for the last number of years. Accountability to residents is an all-time low, but we are more visible than ever. Some of our lessons from attempts to reform the planning board reflect how slowly institutions change and raise questions about how to get a master plan process underway while huge projects await planning board approval right now. How do we more creatively confront what seems to be an inbred assumption that all development is essentially good for the community and needs only minor tweaking before approval? In some and perhaps more instances, we're being forced to take or explore legal challenges to the validity of these large projects. Neighbors of the courthouse have already filed suit. While what we want is a community-wide definition of our future, If our only ability to contain the size and impact of these projects is in the courts, we have to pursue that, and we are. But it's expensive, so take out your wallets. And then just one last thing. One bottom line is that the city manager form of government does not work with a weak city council. The majority of this council has, for the most part, weakened or delayed every proposal we have made for accountability, responsible planning, and zoning reform. They defer continually to a community development department that has enabled many of the recent problematic developments that we see and the traffic nightmares that accompany them. We need new elected and appointed leadership to carry us forward. An election is an opportunity to elect 4 to 5 council members who understand and reliably support planning and effective community involvement, and who recognize that our land and housing mix are disappearing perhaps more quickly than the polar ice cap. Thank you.
Okay, the title of this session is How Can We Make City Government More Democratic and Accountable? The one thing we can all do is try to follow what's going on in city government. But I hope people will read the Cambridge Chronicle, read the Cambridge Day, and read Robert Winter's site, the Cambridge Civic Journal, at rwinters.com. The Cambridge Day is also online, cambridgeday.com. And watch the city council meetings that are televised on Channel 22, and also they're archived on the city website, and you can watch streaming video. Our first speaker is Lee Farris. Her theme is Establish a Citizen Shadow Governance. Lee has been a lifelong community organizer and legislative advocate. She has helped to preserve and create hundreds of units of affordable housing in Boston and Cambridge. Lee has been involved with the Area 4 Port Coalition for more than 2 decades and has served as co-chair of and chair of its committee to distribute hundreds of thousands of dollars to projects to benefit the neighborhood. Lee?
Thank you, Gary. So, first I want to say that the paper that I'm talking off of hopefully has just arrived or is arriving at your table soon. And it's not in your packet. Carolyn has them. And on the back side of it is some lists of upcoming meetings and dates that we want you to know about, but it's not specifically related to the proposal. So I'm actually not talking about shadow governance because I don't think that's something we can do, but I'm trying to propose an idea that I think we could do, a shadow cabinet. And that's, as you'll see on the paper, that's something that the opposition party or minority party does in a parliamentary system. So in our case, what I'm envisioning is that we would get small groups of people that would pay attention to what the city manager is doing, pay attention to what the city council is doing, pay attention to what the city staff are doing, and that we would sort of like blog or collect what we are finding out as we're doing this. And not that alone wouldn't be enough, but part of that, the reason why I'm saying that is because we are down to a weekly paper covering everything here, and they just can't do it. And so I think we need to do some of the research ourselves. And it's also a way to learn things. But more importantly, then as we learn things, it creates a body of people who can make proposals, specific proposals, about what we should be doing instead. So you might ask, well, how is this already different than what the Cambridge Residents Alliance is doing? What I'm talking about is part of what we're doing. However, we're doing it in a sort of catch-as-catch-can way. And we miss a lot of important things, or we're late on a lot of important things. And also because a few people are doing a lot of the watching, it doesn't distribute the knowledge very widely. And then because the knowledge isn't very widely distributed, we can't take all the actions that we can think of doing. So my idea is this is sort of by watching and writing and making counter proposals, this is a way to get more of us up to speed. And it's definitely coming out of the calls that you heard from Heather and Nancy and various other people that we need a big residents movement to turn things around in Cambridge. And at my table, I had heard people saying, we need to put tents on City Hall. We need to call attention to the problems. We need to change this zoning and that zoning. People had all these great ideas, and I want to create a way that we can enact these ideas. And with the number of people in the structure that we have, we cannot do it. So, and we've also seen that even a small change takes, 20 people 100 hours each. It's really tough. So if it's going to stay like that, we're going to need a whole lot more people and a whole lot more hours. So this is a proposal around that. I think that we could get away with starting this with something around as little as 15 or 16 people. It would be nicer to have around 30 people involved. It's a scalable idea, so we could decide, okay, we're only just going to watch the city council, or we're only just going to watch the manager, or whatever we thought was most strategic, and we could then expand if we got more people. It's hard to say exactly how much time it would take, because it's one of those things where the more people do it, the less time it'll take for each person. And so I think it would probably mean you'd need to commit a couple, 3 hours every other week or so at the very least. And what would be one of the advantages of it? One of my favorite advantages, you wouldn't have to go to as many meetings. You would know that the other meeting is covered by somebody else and that they're doing a good job of it, and you can just cover what you want to cover. A main issue with it is it's a lot of work and it would take good coordination. So I want to acknowledge that up front. I hope that you'll like all these ideas that we propose, and that we'll figure out a way to go forward with all of them. And lastly, I just want to say, in the packet you will also see important papers that I don't think have been referred to about the Cambridge Residents Alliance position on the Volpe building and on the Normandy Twining proposal, and then our initial reaction to the new Nexus study on how much money commercial buildings should contribute to affordable housing. Thanks. Bye.
Our next speaker is Paul Stephen Stone. His talk is called Elect the Progressive Council Majority, Limit Developer Contributions. His commentaries appear in the Huffington Post, Cambridge Day, Cambridge Chronicle, and on his Paul Stone's Throw blog. Paul's best-known creation is the Who But W.B. Mason brand. Who But Paul Stone?
First, a disclaimer. The following remarks reflect my own personal opinion. I've been asked to speak about the need to elect a strong, enlightened city council, which, to do that, requires us to replace at least 3 of the folks shown on the screen. Ideally from the back row. I'll speak more later about the criteria that led me to say that. 3 years ago, like most of you, I was totally ignorant of what was happening in our city. Totally ignorant of the city's addiction to development, of the wheels that had been set in motion to virtually rubber stamp any project that came before the planning board or the city council. But then I discovered a staggering fact. If you could change the slide. In the last few years, more than half the development projected for the next 20 years in Cambridge had either been built or permitted. Most of it without the guidance of anything I would consider real planning. Well, that woke me up. And you can change the slide back, please. Once I saw that we were all traveling on a runaway bus with no one at the wheel. A bus that was throwing off passengers, my neighbors and yours, as we merrily careened on our way. Ever since then, I've been struggling, along with others, to grab the steering wheel and slow down the bus. And I guess that's why I'm here today. And don't turn out all the lights because I can't read. Thank you. If I can paraphrase from a far greater orator than myself, friends, neighbors, Cantabrigians, lend me your votes. I come to shake up the city council, not to praise them. For the deeds these councilors do will live long after they're gone, as will their unfortunate zoning decisions and lack of foresight chip away at the foundations of our beloved city. Make no mistake, we are now drawn to an epic battle to preserve all that is most precious to us in Cambridge: our quality of life, our economic and racial diversity, our sense of community identity. The next city council election may well decide the future of our city and whether there's a place for any of us in that future. Many of us rail against the city council for their knee-jerk reactions to complex issues, for the speed with which they approve almost any proposal that hides behind the claims of protecting our most vulnerable citizens. No matter that their political war chests are brimming with developers' donations, no matter that they vote for zoning changes that will award millions to developers while potentially displacing the very people they profess to protect and care about, no matter that they have failed to insist on thoughtful planning for our city's growth. Most of these councilors voted down the Carlone petition, the one tool they could have used to protect our city from misguided mega developments like the Sullivan Courthouse. And though they agreed to a master planning process, they cynically placed it under the control of the very agency whose lax planning and arrogant behavior led to the outcry for a master plan in the first place. That's like sending a mugger out to protect his latest victim. Over and over, they trumpet their concern for the families and poor people flushed out of Cambridge on a tsunami of development, but they never insist on an analysis of the real impacts of all this unbridled development. And so I'm here today with two missions. First, to call for right-thinking individuals to run for city council. We need candidates who will stand up to the pro-development cabal that threatens the fabric of our community. It only takes 4 votes to stop upzoning and spot zoning in its tracks. Just 4 votes to send proposed 19-story luxury towers back to the drawing board. We believe we currently have 3 such enlightened councilors who've shown they can see beyond the false arguments, who won't trade away our city's future for a fast buck. And this time I direct your attention to councilors in the front row of the photo. Secondly, the Cambridge Residents Alliance will be endorsing a slate of candidates in the next election. And I humbly ask you to vote for that slate. Or at least not to vote for anyone in that photo who voted against the Carlone petition, or who supports the status quo, takes money from developers, or naively claims the city is doing a good job planning for its future. Your vote in the next city council election may help decide who gets forced out of Cambridge and who gets to stay. And that's all I have to say, except I'll see you at the polls. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Elon Levy of East Cambridge, talking about ending the Plan E government model. Elon?
Yeah. I guess I can take it in my hand. First of all, Black Lives Matters. Please, Black Lives Matters. Second, I would like to thank the CRA for this meeting because it's pretty amazing, the work you guys are doing. Thanks for the people who organized. It's pretty cool. Now, I think I'm going to be the one who comes up with a fun idea. Let's change our government. I think that right now, what I've observed as an activist, I've been an activist for 8 years. I've taken part in fighting developments in Cambridge for 8 years. I fought during the Alexandria development was really what made me. I wrote a blog on CCTV where you can go and see what happened then, which is happening again over and over again. And I think that basically there's a systemic problem, and the systemic problem is Plan E. Plan E is a form of government which basically allows a city manager to turn the management of a city into a corporation, where you have a CEO, you have the C-suite of executives, and then you have a board, which is the city council, which is elected by us, the shareholders, in that corporation. And it seems that us shareholders have actually no say in the direction of the company, and that the CEO is not listening to us, and that the people who should be putting the pressure on the CEO, which is the city council, avoids to do that at all costs, except for a few exceptions, which need to be mentioned. Councillor Carlone, Mazen, bravo for what you've done over the last year and a half. It's pretty amazing, right? So what I propose is that we elect a mayor, that we have term limits, that we don't allow people who hold a position at the city council to hold another position, elected position. You can't be a state representative and the city councilor at the same time. That's part of this problem. It seems obvious, but it seems natural. Those are basic stuff, and I think that if we do that, and if we go and move in that direction, we'll do something. We'll actually reclaim our democracy and maybe help more people participate in democracy in general, which is not the case now, because basically I've been to so many meetings and I'm such a nuisance that, it's like kind of, he's there again, and no one's going to do the same thing as I do, which is go all the time at all the meetings, because I have the luxury of being able to do that. I make enough money to do it, and I don't have any kids. But I know that it's not the case of everyone. So I like the democracy in which we live, which I think at the local level, it should start at the local level, should be a participatory democracy where we elect our mayor, that there is a term limit so that people can't say, oh, but he's going to be there forever, it's going to be like a city manager and it's going to corrupt us. All that, forget about it. Put term limits and you'll be okay. There are probably other things that should be applied, but some basic rules to make government in Cambridge, which is supposed to be a progressive city, a real democracy, which it is not now. So that was my little thought experiment and what I would throw at you. And for the next year, I'm going to, in the next few weeks, I'll throw out a website where we can start thinking about that, and people can sign up, and maybe we can actually force the hand and get something going on that. You want to talk?
How do we do it?
Well, we work hard. There's a lot of things to do, and I will put up, that's why I put up a website where we'll have all the explanation. There are people who are much more expert at the procedure, which will contribute to that help. But we'll try to figure it out, and through the CRA, which is right now the mothership of the neighborhood of organizations in Cambridge, we'll figure it out. We'll communicate with all of the membership, I'm sure, as things goes along. Thank you very much for your time. I was very honored to speak here.
I expect, Jonathan, tell me if I'm correct here, that as Elon puts up his site, that we will
link to it.
We'll link to it from CambridgeResidenceAlliance.org. Our next speaker is Michael Hawley, who will be speaking about legal initiatives related to the Sullivan Courthouse.
And I guess I'm the last speaker, so thank you. Knew that was coming. And let me just be blunt. I'm here to ask you to send money. I want you to send money, and I want to tell you why it's important. This address will come up again at the end. There is a piece of paper on all of the tables, several pieces of paper, that give instructions on how to chip in to support our legal appeal. The checks can go to Mark Bobrowski, who will be helping our causes in other ways, I believe. And if you have any questions, send email to me, Mike Hawley, at that address. Let me be very quick about this. First, just a tiny bit of context to make sure everybody's on the same page. We're talking about that building, the ugly courthouse in East Cambridge, and it's now a matter for legal appeal. We're trying to get the permits that the planning board has issued revoked. There's a little shot of it from the air. I happen to live in the old church where that red arrow is. That makes me an aggrieved person and a butter. That's why I've been sucked into this appeal. Believe me, it's not something anybody would want to have to do. But I would tell you, I think this is a very important case, not just for what it is, not just for the city, but I think for the country. I think if we can right this government wrong, it will do a great service to the good people who put us here, these two characters, and to other people who follow us. James Green on the right was the first pastor in my church and also the first mayor of Cambridge. Andrew Craigie gave the little speck of land that became the founding nucleus of the neighborhood. It resulted in these sorts of buildings, charming 1800s, elegant buildings, brick and Quincy granite. That's a view of the Bullfinch Plaza. And to give you some context, here's East Cambridge from the air. You've got tens of millions of square feet of dense mid-rise and high-rise urban stuff belting around it. North Point, million-square-foot mall and Galleria, Kendall Square, MIT to the right, and in the middle, you have a quiet little residential oasis. Small houses zoned for 35 feet, little trees, young moms, families, kids, strollers, puppies. It's a neighborhood. And you've got these 3 little blocks shown in green, which are the founding nucleus. That chunk of land was basically given by Craigie for public use forever, and unfortunately we screwed it up. Now let me give you an analogy to tell you why this is important and to help you think maybe a little bit bigger. 3 glamorous looking towers, 27 to 35 stories. They look pretty in an architectural rendering. They look kind of pretty in a photograph from a drone, but they're going to be torn down. It's more than $500 million of construction, probably $1 billion of real estate. It's going away. And the reason it's going away is because that's where it is. Those towers loom over the historic city of Istanbul. It's a World Heritage Site. There's the Blue Mosque, the Hagia Sophia, the Topkapi Palace. Those fuckers do not belong there. And the Supreme Court in Turkey last summer ruled they're going to be torn down. Okay? Now, if an enlightened city like Istanbul can succeed in tearing down 3 brand new towers valued at $1.5 billion, I'd like to think we can get rid of this mistake. Even Bob Healy said it would be best imploded. By the way, I'm just waiting for the Eye of Sauron to light up over it. So, look, the headline on this, then the punchline as to where we are in court, follow very quickly. I think the story is that 2 wrongs don't make a right. And in fact, it's more than 2 wrongs. It's 3, 4, a multitude of wrongs. The first wrong was this major league cock-up. It cost hundreds of millions of dollars in damage. The proposal was to put up a big tower, an enormous parking structure, bulldoze out across Cambridge Street. This was going to take 3 years, cost $15 million. It took 15 to 20 years. It cost more than $100 million in direct damage, hundreds of millions in indirect damage, and resulted in only 1/3 of the thing being built. That's the only reason that we still have some of those charming historic buildings. But it's also why we wound up with this screwy juxtaposition, the evil tower next to the Bullfinch Courthouse. This is a wrong. It is a wrong idea to put, I'll need your indulgence, I'll be done in about 3 minutes. Wrong idea to park a roughly 300-foot tower with 2,000 corporate commuters in the middle of a quiet residential neighborhood. It's stupid. And so how do you get from one wrong to the second wrong? Well, you've got a screwy permitting process. You've got a permitting process that has never denied a permit of this sort, not in 20 years. It's a robotic, clunking arm. It's being misinformed by legal opinions from our city solicitor. Our city solicitor isn't even wrong. I mean, she's beyond wrong on some of these cases. Here's what the case is going to come down to. This matter went into land court, which is somewhat academic, but it's the place to argue about the nuances of permitting. The crux of the argument is going to be, the reason this case will turn, whether or not this is in fact a legal non-conforming structure. Now it sounds like a technicality. I'll try to make it very clear and simple for you. Typically, to become legally non-conforming, you first have to be legal and conforming. You can build a big warehouse legally, but over time zoning changes, it becomes more restrictive. You have a building that therefore becomes non-compliant, but legally so, legally non-conforming. It's grandfathered, if you will. And for that you get special permits to renovate some big old hulking warehouse and turn it into lofts and so forth. This building was never conforming. It was built under government immunity, which is like wearing a bulletproof vest. What that means is not that the law changes, it just means you cannot apply the law. The law goes into hibernation for a while. In particular, the building was built without public notice, without public permits, without building permits. It was built without adhering to fire code. It was built because the government is supreme, and it was most importantly built to 4 times what zoning, even in 1965, would have allowed. That prompted the chairman of the planning board in July to say, I'm not quoting exactly, but I'll give you the gist. He said, what's happening now is bad planning. Good planning would have been for the state to remove the building, remediate the site, then consult the city and ask what the correct zoning should be for that site. And on that basis, conduct a sale. And instead, the state is saying, we don't care about zoning, we built this thing, you know, there it is, deal with it. And the developers, of course, are eager to lease every square inch of the thing. So the argument is that because this was not built in lawful conformity, and in fact, because it was built through spectacular corruption, people went to jail over this project, it's not a lawful building. It sounds ironic. It's a courthouse, but it's not a lawful building. And therefore, it's not a lawfully non-conforming structure. You need a variance. Here's the final analogy I'm going to give you, just so you understand the legal nuance. You can go from special permit to special permit to special permit. As you've seen, it's like getting a rubber stamp. When you get a variance, those are like hen's teeth. They're exemptions. They require proving a hardship, unless you happen to be kayak wanting a bigger sign. Variances are hard to get, and once you get them, you can only continue to modify with a variance. Okay? You can't go back and get more rubber stamps in the form of special permits. In this case, immunity served as a de facto variance. It was a variance that nobody had to ask for. And to put it another way, a private company could have built that horrible building in the 1960s with a humdinger of a variance. And if that had been done, you'd have the same structure, but you could not now modify it with a special permit. So that's what the case turns on. What's happening is there are 5 plaintiffs. There were 2 appeals filed. They include Graham Gund, who's a wonderful architect. He has his practice in the Bullfinch building. Myself and Roger Summons, we live in the old church across the street. Maria Sicoccio, who's right here, her family has lived here for roughly 100 years. And attorney Dan Hill, whose offices are in the Bullfinch building as well. He is a practicing attorney in the area of abutters' rights. And the judge has requested summary proceedings in mid-March, so the 2 sides are going to file legal briefs, and it's simply about this nonconformity question. There's to be a summary judgment hearing on April 7th. If I got the date right, John Hawkinson would know. It's on 7th or the 8th? I think it's April 7th. I don't want to be a day late. Email me. If the judge rules that this is not a legally non-conforming building, we run naked through the streets, because that basically rejects the permits. April 7th, thank you, Joe. That basically means we win, the developer loses, the city and the state lose, and it's back to the drawing boards. If the judge rules the other way, I think that'd be unfortunate. That means the case then goes to trial. It takes several years, and we need everybody's contributions. So there's my final appeal. I'm told to stop. I know we're at the end of the day. If anybody has a question or two, I'm not sure what your process is. Happy to take it, but thank you very much for your indulgence. And I hope, by the way, you know, I guess I'd finish by saying, I think this is important, as I said at the beginning, not just for us, not just for the city, but for the country. There are mistakes like this everywhere, but it's very rare that people have a chance to undo them, to fix them. I think we have that chance. It's not just a once-in-a-lifetime chance. It's a once-and-forever chance, and I'm emotional about that because it was Seth Teller who fought hard about this and gave us that line. It's a once-and-forever chance. It's important, and I hope you'll tell everybody you know to pitch in and at least be aware of it, because this is your battering ram. If we can't win this case, if we can't begin to fix this problem, I don't have much confidence that we can do very well on our other fronts. So thank you again.
Thank you very much, Mike. And if anybody would like to contribute to the legal effort and make it a tax-deductible contribution, you can send it to us at the Association of Cambridge Neighborhoods. We're a 501c3 organization. And let's see, we'll put information about that on the CambridgeResidenceAlliance.org website. Okay, next up, let's return to the groups, to your table groups for 15 minutes, where you can summarize your discussion, and then after 15 minutes, we'd ask the recorders at the table to come up and present their concluding points. Thank you.
Let's get ready to have the table reporters come up to the front so they can have a nice period of time to report How their discussion went, or table number 1? Okay.
Okay. We're supposed to comment on the second part, right? Yeah. Our table, I think we all felt how important it is to get people who are personally affected by displacement and lack of affordable housing, or people who are personally affected by gentrification in Cambridge, to get more involved in what we're doing here. And that means getting them to our meetings, getting them, or going to them, and talking about the issues with them. One suggestion was having block parties to involve people. Another was to go to the high school and talk to the students and get them involved. Using media more, technology to reach young people. That was a big issue, but also other people who are affected by displacement. I think there was a general feeling by almost everyone at our table about how important it is to elect a progressive city council and, support the Cambridge Residents Alliance efforts to do that. Also, the newcomers, the techies who are moving into Cambridge and displacing people, a lot of them have progressive values, even though, they're not aware of what they're doing to the city. So if there's some way of educating them and getting them involved, it would be a good thing. I think those are the main points.
Okay, I hope I can do our table justice. I think the thing that kept coming up with us was the need for collective action, for getting more and more people involved, and the Cambridge Residents Alliance can be that vehicle, whether through Lee's idea of shadow cabinet or other things where people can concentrate on a particular area, knowing that other people are dealing with other things. But we need to get more people involved and more people educated. And I think the other thing we talked about was respect, and the respect that the city government and city officials, including city councilors, the members of boards, should have for people who show up and get involved. And I think that's seriously lacking. I think I'm probably one of the people at the table who's experienced it the most just by showing up more. But other people saw it as well. And again, having more people there makes it harder for them to discount you. So I think that what we hoped would come out of this is effective ways for more people to get involved in shaping what happens with the city.
We had a lot of questions and discussion about how hard is it to abolish Plan E? How do we do it? Would it help, or would we end up like Boston with someone like Mayor Walsh? We had a lot of questions about abolishing Plan E. Would it help, or would we end up more like Boston with, Mayor Walsh? There was also discussion about formally recognizing that people have different talents here, especially, and we need to adopt a way of utilizing different talents. For instance, some people are very good with website design and scanning in documents, and other people are really much better at one-on-one meetings, with neighbors and sort of spreading the word that way. Someone had a legitimate question about connecting with other people who see us more as anti-development. And that would be, people more vested in education issues, climate change, bicycle paths, all that sort of thing. I have my own misgivings about that because most developers who come will say we're going to exceed the LEEDs requirement. We're not going to be silver, we're not going to be gold, we're going to be platinum. So I think that would satisfy a lot of people. Another issue that some people feel actually makes most people complacent is that the tax rate is low. And that is true, because I've gotten that response. There was a suggestion that we have a change in the state law so that there would be full disclosure of all interests in terms of stocks, etc., when any developer has a petition before the city. So this would include not just city council, but any city employee. I think that would be a great idea. There is a disclosure statute right now having to do, which would cover our city councilors, but it only covers them in terms of their campaign contributions and only if they're voting on something. So I think that was essentially why they voted down Councilor Carlone's petition, because although they may still have a duty to file a disclosure, they don't have to announce it in public, as they're voting. So they're pretty much immune. So that's...
First off, I was so impressed by people here today. I just was so impressed by our table, and I wish I could at all the tables because it's an amazing group of people. So well done, everybody. So our group, first of all, we need to have another meeting. That was the first agreement, because there's so much good stuff to figure out here. The second was we need to figure out what would be a strong organizational structure for this. And we also want to be sure that we don't just think about neighborhoods, but also other kinds of groups that have other cross-neighborhood interests, whether it's environment or whatever it might be. So we need to find a way to bring them into this. We focused on the city council, on having an agreed-upon platform and a slate that agrees with that platform. And then, very importantly, for when those people are elected, we have a job of following through, so we make sure that we support them, we make sure that they do what they said they would do, and that we vote for them the next time when they stand for election. We need a physical presence on the street. We can't just be digital. It's great communicating using digital means, but we also need to be seen. It's about our feet on the ground, in a sense. We need to also shed light on the votes of city councilors. We need to reveal who their donors are. That information is freely available. Some of it's being collected. But we need a lot more sunshine to make good decisions about our city council. And looking at how elections should be run, funded, that kind of thing, certainly needs more attention. And lastly, well, actually, I think that's it. Thank you.
A great deal of appreciation for the breadth of information, and perhaps an observation that it was a lot and a little hard to absorb so much. Some people thought fewer, deeper. Other people actually appreciated the breadth of it because they felt like they got a taste of a number of different things. One person suggested maybe we actually need to sort of have two forums, though, one in which a lot of information is kind of put out and digested, and then a second one where people kind of say, how do we want to move forward? Suggestions a lot about really expanding our creativity in terms of trying to address some of the issues that were brought up. And we had people talking about looking at all kinds of ideas, everything from co-housing. One of the people who's able to stay in Cambridge, a young person, is because she lives in a house with people with disabilities. It's like, are there other creative ways to think about matching things? How did the Middle East able to buy their building after all of that conversation? And is there other ways that housing, that locations can actually be bought, and creative ways to buy buildings so that then it can be determined more directly? Even thoughts about sort of municipal ownership of electricity, banks, etc. So there's more local ability to use funds raised in Cambridge for creative ideas. similar thoughts about reaching out around diversity, and many reiterating this notion of young people who are growing up in this city and have that kind of generational investment in this city from having gone to school here, etc., who can't stay here anymore. Special shout out to Gore House, just to say Santos and Ray and Roberts who are here. Gore House on Windsor Street is a kind of, we're not just going to actually think about what needs to change, we're going to actually just live our lives in the way that we think things ought to be happening. And they're doing that on a very small scale and building that kind of community and providing housing and entrepreneurship around technology, going where people are. The notion of what's happened in Somerville in terms of some of that planning and, you know, collaborating regionally with people who have maybe gotten a certain jump on things. A lot of appreciation for the information that the Residents Alliance has, and more thoughtful and creative ways about how to get it out, how even people found out about today's forum, and the notion of citywide activism and just continuing to try and build citywide activism.
I echo what people have said. There's been so many wonderful ideas presenting here today. And Table 6, one of the themes that kept getting echoed is the need for planning. The need to have a master plan seems essential if we wish to intervene with the piecemeal way things have been developed, and to think about where the density makes sense and structure where it doesn't. Also, to leverage better that Cambridge is a place where developers do want to be, and to leverage the inclusionary zoning, thinking about that in a much more increased way. The nexus, the amount that's coming from nexus, and we cannot count on the federal funds anymore. The funding has been decreased for housing and for disabled people in housing. So that was one of the thoughts along the idea of master planning, is thinking about an urban ring and thinking about Cambridge as within a context of transportation that could go east, west, north, south, connecting more with Somerville, Boston, etc., so that the full impact is not, we need to build the housing right here, but connecting things. The need to integrate environmental. The study will be coming out on February 12th. It's going to be looking at the impact of flooding and of most immediately heat, with the heat urban island effect, and as we build over all our green space. That's something we hope people will look at. The changing from Plan E, what that process would mean, we thought we would be looking out to that. That will be up on the website. And also the idea of the shadow cabinet, we wondered, well, how does the shadow cabinet get elected? You know, what would that process be? So that you've got a democratic shadowing of the system. And I think that we supported the slate, looking at a slate for city council, and really professionalizing the search for the city manager. That bringing someone in who can help be the guide for that, not just in some kind of pro forma way, but truly to help guide that process actually happening. And that city manager right now seems really crucial. And if we get the Olympic Games, we said, I know, but here's the strategy. Follow New York City, win the national, election for that. Use that to leverage all kinds of improvements in our transportation system, et cetera, but don't actually get it, So, okay. Leverage, that's the
Table 7. So we discussed many of the items that have already been listed, but because of the time, I would say that the ones that we would like to reiterate in terms of what do we do from here. We talked about following the city councilors, really looking seriously at how they're voting, possibly developing an idea of a shadow cabinet. I think that it's not fully developed yet, but it's certainly something to consider. It's important for us to see how city councilors are voting so that we can ultimately set up, hopefully, a progressive slate with a platform, and that would be, the progressive slate would represent a platform. That was what we mostly talked about. We also talked about the master plan and how it's essential to have a master plan, and how we don't understand how we're going to continue in a positive way without one. So we know that Dennis Carlone had submitted that idea, but we would like to go back to that and really work on it more. I think those were the 3 ideas that we harped on. We had a mix of people of owners and renters, young and some older, and the younger people are really anxious and scared about how they're going to be able to afford rents. People who are coming in with not 6-figure salaries, but decent salaries, how are they going to afford rents? Singles and couples, and certainly families, because we're not building apartments with few apartments with 3-bedroom or more bedrooms. I think that's it. Okay.
I'm going to report for Table 8, but if whoever's going to report for Table 9 can start getting ready and come up so we can be fast, that would be great. So we thought about a lot of the things that other people have said, so I'm going to focus more on things that we haven't been said yet. So one was the question of how to create the political power that will both elect new councilors but also scare the existing councilors. And so one of the ideas there was look at who else is putting endorsements out in the last election and see if we can find common elements to evaluate councilors on with those folks, which would help make our slates bigger and more powerful if they were supported by multiple groups. There was a set of interesting points, like a Real Estate Transparency Act that one of our table members is discussing with Councilor Mazin. So I won't try to explain it, but it's to deal with how real estate is bought and sold now. Another point was that Google and some of these new high-tech corporations are part of the problem, and can we talk to them and see if they can also help solve things. And same thing with the universities, like MIT's new real estate lab, to develop responses to the global investment problem that we're experiencing. And then we wanted to name something that didn't get discussed much today, but that there is sort of a, it feels to some of us like the new people that are moving into our neighborhoods have different values than some of us who have been in the neighborhoods for a long time, and that sometimes the feeling can be that we're not welcome in our own neighborhoods anymore. And I'm sure probably it goes the other way too. So we didn't have solutions to that, but we thought we should name it. Thanks.
I'm reporting from Table 9, and there was general unanimity at our table around the idea of needing to move away from the E form of government to another one, although people were concerned about how much might be involved with that. There was some concern expressed about whether it would do that much good to elect good city council people to a position that had no power. And then, but after discussion, people did feel that it would be a good idea to focus energy on that, because we would at least have, if we had people working as a team on the city council to try to hold the city manager, accountable, and at the same time sort of organizing from the city council, be much more effective in terms of involving more of the city in the fight to maintain the good qualities that we have. People believed that it was necessary to go door to door, and we had to think about trying to organize door-to-door campaigning, either in the process of changing city government or the process of election, that's the most effective way to move things forward. But some people also believe that we maybe need to think out of the box, and if necessary, do civil disobedience to highlight the issues as they develop, to let the silent majority of us who live in Cambridge know more about what's going on here and how their life might be affected by it. And people like the shadow government proposal, because it seemed a way there had been talk at our table in the first round about trying to attend every city council meeting, and this would be a way to organize that so it didn't all fall on all of us doing the same thing, but was more organized. And there was a feeling that they really liked the size and the breadth of the group of us gathered here and the work that we were trying to do, and the fact that so many people are interested. They did feel we needed to find a way to reach out so that there's, even more people able to make such positive contributions as the brother and sister did, who were talking about how Black lives and Black livelihood matter, that we need to have more diversity in our movement and in our action moving forward.
Phyllis Bredholz, also our photographer.
There was a lot of recognition, this is a slight repetition, of the extraordinary work that went into the presentations today, the depth of the research that people did, the thoughtfulness, and the courage that people showed in speaking out candidly about how they felt about issues. It's relatively rare that we're in a public forum where people are quite so candid, and it actually, I think, then led to some interesting candor at our table. People were amazed at how much they didn't know, and so in response to that question, should we have gone deeper with fewer questions or keep the broad spectrum, I think people were so amazed at how much they didn't know, how much they learned today, that it was a real vote in favor of the broader picture. A couple of things that people committed to. One was to go to the upcoming CRA meetings, and if each one of us who came to those meetings made a commitment to bring one person with us. There were well over 100 people here today, and those meetings are generally relatively small. It's the same few people who are doing the heavy lifting, and it would be enormously helpful if people would show up to those meetings and just bring one more person with you. We talked about the power of making one phone call or sending one email to the City Council, to the to CDC, to the Planning Board, how every one vote, every one letter, every one phone call, every one even minimal, it doesn't have to be a lengthy email, but every one represents something like 10 other people. And so it's important to recognize the power of each one of us bringing some, speaking out. Somebody made a very interesting point. She said that there needs to be a reframing of how we speak about people with money. We need to work with our neighbors and educate them all about housing needs and diversity. And so it was just a recognition that there was a kind of denigration of people with money, and we have to recognize that there's some value in having that money work with us, and so we need to be somehow a little more generous in the way we talk about people and to be more inclusive. And I think that's just about, those are the most important points. But I have just one request in terms of organizing, and that is that when the last table is represented and the last speaker comes forward, it would be enormously helpful if each of us would just take 5 chairs and put them together to help reorganize the senior center. Thank you.
Table 11, thought it was important to try and expand our base and our numbers in the way that other tables talked about it. It seemed like working on electing a council majority that was supportive of our objectives seemed to be the primary, get the most attention. So it seems like we need to focus on the upcoming election quite a bit and how we're going to mobilize for that. We were talking about how we need to, the Cambridge Residents Alliance and other neighborhood groups need to work very hard to get a clear set of objectives regarding affordable housing, low and moderate income housing, and middle income housing that are very concrete, because then city councilors can't talk in vague terms as though they're very supportive of what we're trying to do, and then take votes that in fact don't move us toward that goal. And so that a lot of work needs to be done in our Affordable Housing Committee and in working with other neighborhood groups and developing a consensus, a broad consensus position, but that is very specific, has very concrete goals and objectives. Because only if they're concrete like that, then that's the only way you can hold a counselor who says he's with you. You can only hold them accountable if you're very concrete in the objectives that you're getting them to sign on to. And we talked about Cambridge being the richest city in the state in terms of the population versus the tax base. This is a city that can afford to spend its own money on affordable and middle income housing. And so far not one plug nickel gets spent in this city. It's all federal money, it's state money, it's contributions that the developers have to make. But there's no city money going into affordable and middle income housing. And we need to get the city to give tax incentives for building low and moderate and middle income housing above the required level. So there would be property tax breaks that are offered for that. And we need to get the city to start spending its own general revenues to develop housing, which the city of Boston has been doing since the year 2000. Anthony Galluccio liked those particular housing ideas, and he finds it very difficult to say no to people who want him, so he's going to be joining the Affordable Housing Committee to work on
Only
those.
if Nancy and Jonathan say it's okay.
And Ray and Santos from Gorey House are interested in collaborating more closely with the Cambridge Residents Alliance and our common interests. And Justin Rose, who works with Mass Senior Action Council and has monthly programs here, is going to help us arrange for Cambridge Residents Alliance to do a presentation. He says there's all kinds of seniors that are ready to rock and roll with us. We just have to get it together to go out and meet with them.
Started to do some research on the discrepancy between what some of the current city councilors say they are supporting and how they vote. And that there is a gap sometimes, there's a discrepancy, and there's some research being done to make that public. So that would be very important.
Thank you all so much. It's been a wonderful afternoon. Wonderful.